Were there any problems in the last lecture for you, or is there anything that is not understood? Is everything clear? Good, thank God, everything is fine. We will continue, God willing, talking about nuclear imaging. Last time we discussed the basics of nuclear imaging and talked about the different types of isotopes, including alpha decay, beta decay, gamma decay, beta minus, and beta plus. We also discussed internal conversion and electron capture, and we talked about how the production of radioisotopes is done using the cyclotron and nuclear reactor, as well as the radioisotope generator. We said we had finished We talked about the nuclear reactor and briefly discussed in detail the generator, although we did not gain much benefit from the generator. Then we mentioned that we would delve into radiopharmaceuticals in our discussion. The generator, or radioisotope generator, is what is used to generate the radioactive material in the process. This is the most common machine I can use to generate radioactive material. So, where exactly does this technetium come from? The parent is molybdenum, as you might know, which has a half-life of 67 hours, and molybdenum technetium has a half-life of 6 hours. The whole idea is that I get the generator from the nuclear reactor. The overall concept is quite straightforward and simple regarding the generator. Inside the generator, as we discussed last time, there is molybdenum. If we open the generator from the inside, you'll find it looks like this. First of all, this generator is very heavy, not light. It can weigh around 35 kilograms or so. This is because its outer layer contains lead, which is meant to block any radiation, whether it is gamma or any other type, and to protect the worker from radiation hazards. Therefore, it must be shielded. The density of the lead is high, which makes the generator heavy in terms of size or weight. The main idea is that I have molybdenum, which is fixed onto alumina. Alumina is a chemical substance whose function is to stabilize or bond with molybdenum. The idea is that it bonds with molybdenum. Technetium has a half-life of 67 hours, which means after 67 hours, its activity is halved. Technetium is continuously produced, and the technetium that is generated is present here, along with molybdenum. Both molybdenum and technetium are radioisotopes, but they differ in their atomic numbers. This difference allows for their chemical separation. We mentioned that the atomic number is responsible for the chemical properties of the material. If two materials have the same atomic number, they cannot be chemically separated. But if there is a difference in atomic numbers, they can be separated. To achieve this separation, the idea is to use saline solution. The saline solution works by moving down until it reaches molybdenum, where it can either wash it out or bind with technetium.
It is related to technetium coming from the other side here. There is a vacuum container that, due to being vacuum sealed, drives the movement of saline from the other side. When a vacuum container is brought in, placing a vacuum container will increase the suction power because it is vacuum sealed. In this case, the saline wizard comes down here, takes the technetium, and extracts it from the other side. Of course, the vial containing it is located in a container. This container is made of lead to prevent any radiation from escaping. This is the idea of elution. I call it elution, or I call it milking. They call it milking because you work with it every day. For example, I receive a generator in the nuclear medicine department, and I work with it for a week or two, depending on your radioactive strength, based on the activity of the molybdenum. If the molybdenum comes to me at 15 gigabecquerels, This can last me 2 weeks. I prefer to work with it for 2 weeks. If it comes to me at 10 gigabecquerels, I can work with it for 1 week. Why? Because every day you come to do milking or you come to do elution. For example, on the first day, the Gala generator produced a milking with high activity, let's say 1000 millicuries. On the second day, the activity decreased. On the third day, the activity continued to decrease, and on the fourth day, it decreased further, and so on until the end of the week. The activity keeps decreasing. Why? Because the radioactive activity of the molybdenum itself is decreasing, and consequently, the produced amount or produced activity is diminishing. The technetium activity decreases every day, so I perform elution every day, meaning I do milking every day. This milking process is referred to as the cow machine. For me, the cow machine is essentially the generator. The activity of technetium decreases, 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 decreases. I have 100 units of technetium, and I know I have 5 patients. Each patient will require 20 millicuries, so that means the 100 units will be enough for me. However, on the last day, the activity I received was 20 millicuries, which will only be sufficient for 1 patient. If I need, for example, an activity of 20 millicuries, then that will only be enough for 1 patient. Over time, the activity decreases, and therefore, I won't be able to meet the number of patients coming to the nuclear medicine department for treatment. Why wait 24 hours? Because after 4 hours of technetium, equilibrium occurs. What is equilibrium? 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 So how does this happen? I want you to imagine this with me. Molybdenum activity decays as its radioactive isotopes transform into stable forms over time. This natural process reduces activity levels as radioactive atoms decrease. The half-life is the period needed for activity to drop to half, crucial for applications like medical imaging and nuclear power. How long does this take? At this time, it is 4 half-lives, which means 24 hours, because the half-life of technetium is 6 hours. Therefore, after 24 hours, it will reach 0, and then it will start to rise. This point is the equilibrium point. What does equilibrium mean? It means a point where the activity of molybdenum equals the activity of technetium. That's why the elution factor at this point represents the maximum activity of technetium. This is the highest time when the activity of technetium is very high, so you can benefit from all of it. So I call this point transient equilibrium. They call it transient equilibrium. This transient equilibrium means that I have molybdenum and its half-life is long. Longer than technetium, longer than parent means longer than daughter, with a short half-life, and the parent has a long half-life. This is called transient equilibrium. Okay, I made an illusion here. The activity reached 0. After 24 hours, equilibrium will be achieved. I made an illusion to drop to 0, wait 24 hours for the activity to rise, and so on, and so forth. This is the idea of the generator or the elution technique that occurs, or the milking that is done. All these are terms for the same situation. This is clear, and there is no problem. Okay, let's talk about this new type. We also mentioned that there is another type of generator, but it is not as common as the one that gives you krypton 81 metastable. The half-life of rubidium is 4.5. and it operates using the same technique and process. But what happens here is called what? Because it is considered in relation to it. It means comparing a very long half-life. As for me, it means comparing the comparison with the krypton has a half-life of 13 seconds. Imagine that after 13 seconds, if you have 100 millicuries of this krypton, after another 13 seconds, it will be 50. And after another 13 seconds, it will be 25. Its decay is very rapid. In comparison, the half-life of rubidium and krypton shows a significant difference. Rubidium has a half-life of 4.5 hours, while krypton is just 13 seconds. The equilibrium that occurs between them is called secular equilibrium. Okay, the point we are discussing now is that I have technetium. After the procedure, what do I want to do? I want to take an image. So, what is the missing step now, doctors? The missing step is that I want to create a tabling for the radioactive isotope I have. A pharmaceutical with a chemical compound, and then I can give it an injection, and it will go to the target organ for which I want to perform my imaging to make measurements or determine the physiological function of this compound. Now, before we talk about the labeling process, let's say that if I want to select a radioisotope for imaging, what do you think the idea behind this radioisotope is? I mean, if I think about it, should I choose one with a long half-life or a short half-life? Should it be short enough to be, for example, 13 seconds or 20 minutes? Or should it be short enough to allow for scanning the patient? I can't say it's very short, meaning its half-life shouldn't be 13 seconds or 20 minutes. It should be short enough for me to perform the scan. So why short and not long? Because in the end, you want to protect the patient. So if today I give an injection to the patient using, for example, a rubidium isotope with a long half-life, the radiation dose that the patient will receive will be significant. In this case, you have harmed the patient. Therefore, you must choose a radioactive isotope with a short half-life. That's number one. Secondly, does this radioactive isotope emit gamma, beta, alpha, or what? Gamma is preferred because alpha and beta particles will be absorbed and won't pass through the patient's body. I need something that can penetrate and be detected by the gamma detector or my detector. If we're talking about alpha and beta, they will be absorbed inside the patient and won't pass through, but it must be gamma. Ideally, it should be a pure gamma emitter or gamma along with particles, but pure gamma is better. Gamma emitters are very good. These are all the points that I need to keep in mind when making my selection. Oh, and another point, it is preferable for the gamma ray to be monoenergetic because some isotopes produce a lot of energy from gamma rays. If it produces too much energy, it will create problems in the verification process. When I verify gamma photons, I want most of the photons to have a single energy. This will make it much easier for me in the formation process and image creation. However, if I have multi-energies, it's like saying that this radioisotope will give you 1,000 photons and all 1,000 photons are at 100 keV. This is much better at 100 kiloelectron volts for detection and scan time than saying I have 500 photons at 100 and I observe 300 photons at, for example, 120 and also 200 photons at, say, 140. So what have you done? You have produced many photons or different photon energies. Consequently, when detection occurs, you only select one energy for detection and reject the rest. For example, if I choose 140 or 100, the remaining photons you didn't benefit from will increase your scan time. You'll need more time in the scan to compensate for the loss you experienced because they have different energies, so you won't benefit from them in the detection process. This will become clearer when we talk about the mechanism of the gamma camera and the detection process for the photons coming from the tissue. It's preferable that when this isotope undergoes decay, it gives me a stable daughter, meaning it shouldn't produce another radioactive material. It should give me a stable substance so it doesn't emit beta particles or another gamma photon. It should decay to a stable isotope. It's easy for it to bind to different pharmaceuticals, just as it's easy for it to bind to a chemical carrier that goes to the bone, another chemical carrier that goes to the heart, and another chemical carrier that goes to the thyroid, and so on. So it can bind to various pharmaceuticals easily, like a chemical carrier that goes to the bone, a chemical carrier that goes to the heart, and a chemical carrier that goes to the thyroid. It facilitates the interaction between it and the chemical compound. Secondly, it should not change the behavior of the pharmaceuticals, meaning that the binding with it should not alter its metabolism or change the chemical compound, nor make it toxic, or, for example, change its biodistribution. There should be stability, and it should not alter the behavior of the pharmaceuticals. The second thing is that when labeling occurs between it and the chemical carrier, this interaction should be stable for me. Stable at normal temperature means that I have done the labeling and left the vial like this for an hour or two, or until the patient comes in to work on it. Typically, it should be stable. Nothing should happen during that time. If it is not stable, then my sample is ruined. For example, approximately. In general, usually nothing should happen. For me, I cannot benefit from what I obtain. It must be sustainable in a Roman school that does not affect any metabolism. It remains impossible. Today, I cannot go and obtain radioactive material from a place, for example, outside Egypt. In this case, the activity will reach me with very little activity, and the shared activity will decrease. In this case, when the shared activity decreases, I will not be able to benefit from it based on the number of patients. The concentration or my activity, when it decreases, I cannot benefit from it based on the number of patients. So what does specific activity mean? It means I have, for example, my vial. Let's assume it contains 5 milliliters of saline, 5 milliliters of saline solution, and within it, 100 milliliters of another solution in their vial. Five milliliters contain 100 milliliters. This vial is from outside Egypt. It will take 6 hours, and the radioactive substance will take 6 hours. When it arrives at the center, how many millicuries? There are 50 millicuries present in how many mils of the solution? What is the concentration activity obtained? 50 millicuries. I said it remains. You remain at that time of yours, I said. So, for me, as someone who wants to use the radioactive material, it has to be high while I am working. Are you okay? Because when you increase that, it's not good for the process that will take place. What will happen between the isotope and the pharmaceutical or chemical compound present is that if the specific activity is high, as you increase the saline chemistry, you are increasing the volume. Therefore, the probability of interactions will be lower than if your volume is small and your activity is high in that small volume. In that case, the probability of interactions between the isotope and the chemical compound will be high. Of course, it remains easy and cheap in the production process. All of this makes sense and does not change anything in the function or patient physiology. However, there is an important point called high target and non-target imaging. What does this mean? For example, if I am imaging the heart, I want the activity or the radioactive substance or the radiopharmaceutical to reach only the heart, which I call the target. And the non-target is the background area around the heart. So where is the higher concentration? It is in the heart compared to the background. This means that the high target to non-target ratio is optimal for me, as the accumulation of the radioactive substance should be higher in the target organ than in the non-target organ. If the biodistribution of the radioactive substance goes to the non-target organ more than the target organ, then at that time you will not get a good image. You want an image where the accumulation is present in the target organ compared to the surrounding background. This is the same information as what is found in radiopharmaceuticals like technetium MDP, mesorabine diphosphonate. Specifically, there is a phosphate group, and we said that if I have patients, this is their entire body. In particular, there are places here where you find this image. This is an inverted image. The black areas in this image represent the hot lesions, which are called hot spots. The term hot lesion is repeated multiple times in the text, as previously stated. Additionally, the presence of these hot spots is significant. I have two types of cells, which are osteoclasts and osteoclasts. The osteoclasts are responsible for breaking down, while the osteoblasts are responsible for building. To build, osteoblasts need calcium and phosphate. Where do they get them from? They get them from the blood. Now, if you administer MDP, it has a phosphate group but comes with technetium. You won't see the technetium. So take this technetium and apply it in the areas where there are osteoclasts, and you will see hot lesions appearing like this. This allows you to differentiate between areas with higher activity or higher accumulation of technetium, which are called hot lesions. This depends on the patient's case. For example, prostate cancer, where you can see the metastases, or breast cancer, where you can see the existing metastases, or if there is a fracture or inflammation, or whatever the case may be. This is, of course, based on the patient's history, but that's the main idea. Here is the same video that explains if you have a problem regarding the bone skin, meaning if you have an issue with the spine. Here is the same video that illustrates if you have a problem regarding the bone skin, meaning if you have an issue with the spine. For example, in the vertebrae, as we see, after the injection of the radiopharmaceutical, as we mentioned, it typically moves in the bloodstream. In the case of the bone scan, it usually takes about 2 to 3 hours to achieve complete biodistribution of the radiopharmaceutical in the body. The patient should start drinking a lot of water and may need to use the toilet before the imaging to void the bladder, so the bladder does not appear overly illuminated in the bone scan, which could affect the imaging of the rest of the whole body. For example, if there is a lesion or problem, as we said, it may appear illuminated in the whole body image. The bone scan, of course, is different. There could be a fracture, a metastasis present, or any other condition. Another thing is radiopharmaceuticals such as MEB. MEB is the meso-oxyisobutyl isonitrile that I use in the heart. As I mentioned, inside the heart, within the myocardial muscle, there are myocytes, the cells present in the myocardium, which contain mitochondria. Electrostatic binding occurs between technetium and MEB and the negative charge present on the surface of the mitochondria. This negative charge, which is represented in blue, facilitates electrostatic binding between technetium and MEB, which has a positive charge. This results in imaging of the myocardium. After that, the coronary arteries supply and nourish everything from the coronary artery, whether it is the circumflex, the left anterior descending, or the right coronary artery. Each of them nourishes the segments, allowing us to observe the myocardial wall and create the images we see, as I discussed last time. All these images are taken in axial, coronal, and sagittal views. In the concept of axial and coronal imaging in radiology, the same idea applies. It starts by cutting the myocardium in this way. Here is the heart. And it begins to take sections like this. This is for the axial view. And it takes sections like this for the coronal view or vertical long axis. Or it takes sections like this. This is the horizontal long axis view, where each cross-section shows the segments located inferior, septal, lateral, and anterior. Each segment is supplied by blood supply. And we start to observe how blood perfusion is within the myocardial wall. Then I began to discuss the stress test study. And of course, as we will talk about shortly, the gated technique for the ECG, or Y. This examination is performed gated. This is one of the acquisition modes available on the SPECT or gamma camera, which uses technetium. DTPA is essentially a substance that is water-loving, meaning it follows the same pathway as